And so that's why I made Mount it all. That's why they're saying, hey, this is a surprise, is that this is not following the expected evolution of tail weapons in Ankylosaurs.
Well, g'day, it's Ken Carlson here from Creation Unfolding. So welcome back, and today I have Dr. Matt McLain from the Masters University with me today. So Matt, welcome back to the channel. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing out there at the Masters, and tell us about what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so thanks for having me again, Ken. I am a professor out here at the Masters University, which is in Southern California, and we are committed to Christ and Scripture. And so we have a lot of different academic programs. I get to be in the science department, and so we offer degrees in biology and geoscience, and then we've got things out in computer science, engineering, math, all that kind of stuff too. But I am a paleontologist. That's why I do my research, looking at dinosaurs and pterosaurs and other creatures like that. And my students get to participate with me in that, and I get to work with other people too. It's really fun, exciting things. And today we are going to be talking about a dinosaur, a recent dinosaur discovery that is really, really cool on a number of levels. And it's a exciting something that we knew existed beforehand a few years ago, but we didn't really know exactly what we were looking at. And so this has been kind of cool confirmation of it. So the animal's called Spikelis.
Spikelis, I love that name.
Spikelis. Yeah, it's a good name.
This is an Ankylosaur.
Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, this isn't the first time we've talked about Ankylosaurs on your channel, actually. We did a video a while ago about the vocal cords and larynx and stuff of an Ankylosaur. So Ankylosaurs are these big dinosaurs they're plant eaters. They're kind of like big tanks, essentially, these kind of lumbering four-footed dinosaurs, and they are covered all over their bodies with armor. So that armor is bony plates and spikes and things like that. They're called osteoderms, so they're bony armor that is embedded in the skin, basically. You can think of them like, almost in a sense, kind of reminds you of an armadillo or something like that at first glance, but it's very different the way it's set up. And the bony armor will go back all the way down the back and on the tail. And a lot of our Ankylosaurs will have some kind of weapon at the end of their tail. So often it's like a tail club. And the club is just these fused osteoderms, and then the last few vertebrae in the tail will actually fuse together to make what's called the handle, and it makes a weapon for swinging. So they'll swing these tails to basically defend themselves, or maybe they would have done this for intraspecific combat, right? So you've got two males fighting over females or territory or things. They might have been smacking each other with their tails.
One of the Jurassic Parks had that in it. Which one was that?
Oh yeah. I think it's the first Jurassic World. They have because they have the little gyro ball thing they're spinning around, and they get smacked by one of the Ankylosaur
there you
tails.
go. If you want to see what that looks like, go and watch that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic, scientifically accurate depiction of creatures. So
yeah.
So these are cool dinosaurs. A lot of people, it's their favorites. But this one is really, really weird. And so originally back in 2021, they named the species off of one bone. And you might be like, well, that doesn't sound very valid, right? I mean, how distinct can one bone be? So this one bone, it's a rib, which once again, you're like, ribs are not very diagnostic bones, right?
Yeah.
This rib has spikes coming out of it, like out of the outside of it. And no other animal that we know of has like bony armor coming off of its ribs. Like they're actually fused to the ribs coming off. Like I said, this bony armor in these dinosaurs is in the skin. It's embedded in the skin. It's not usually fused to the skeleton, right? And so this was really weird. And when they found this rib, they were like, okay, this is unique. We don't have any other animal like this. And they are like, the closest thing, the shape of the cross section of the rib and stuff, they're like, this is probably an Ankylosaur, but all we have is a rib. And there's no other Ankylosaur like this. And so a lot of people, when they first published this in 2021, people were like, cool, but can we really be certain that this is an Ankylosaur? And so just this year, they came out with new fossils from this. So they got a lot more of the skeleton, a lot of the armor preserved. So they've got stuff around the neck, stuff on the back. They've got this big shield over the hips. And then they've got also the actual skeletal parts. So they've got a little piece of the skull. They've got some vertebrae going along. They've got a piece of the shoulder and the hips. So it's not a ton of stuff. It's a lot more than a rib, which is cool. But it reveals that this dinosaur is much weirder than they thought it ever was. It's got this crazy spiky collar going around the neck with spikes going. I mean, it looks like a punk rocker kind of thing, you know. And that's the thing with this dinosaur is that it is spiny. Like it's really really spiny. There's just spines coming out everywhere. And so that's a big surprise. And I think if we're gonna have a takeaway already, kind of our application thinking, this is something nobody was expecting. And that is one of the wonders of God's creation is that the more we explore, the more surprised we are, right? We never get to this point where we're like, we know everything. And as you explore in science, whether you're going out to the farthest reach of the galaxy, whether you're under the microscope, whether you're digging into the fossil record, or even studying animals alive today, deep in the oceans or in the rainforest, we just keep getting surprised, right? And this is a unique expression of the glory of God. And so sure enough, this animal, all down its ribs, it's got spikes coming off the ribs, and it's got as well as bony armor embedded in the skin. And they actually say in the paper, and the authors are Maidmont et al., they say this new specimen reveals extreme dermal armor modifications unlike those of any other vertebrate, extinct or extant.
Wow.
So super unique. And they fall outside, far outside, actually, they say, the range of morphology shown by other armored dinosaurs. So this is a very unique creature. No one was really expecting that. And so that's the one takeaway right there. Hey, this is glory of God on display. This is a really cool creature. God did something unique with this animal, and we can appreciate that and wonder at that.
Mm-hmm.
But the next sentence in the paper introduces our other thing we want to talk about. They say our results present substantial challenges to existing hypotheses regarding the evolution of tail weaponry and armor in ankylosaurs. And so that's kind of what we want to look at. And the reason is because we want to talk about those tail clubs, right? So, like I said, the end of the club, it's these osteoderms that fuse together. But going back along the tail, the last few tail vertebrae will fuse together to make the handle. So it's just one big bony unit is the idea. And that thing can be swung like a sledgehammer to hit stuff, right? So if you're thinking like an evolutionist, okay, that has to evolve from somewhere, right? Like you don't just suddenly pop into existence a full tail club, right? And so there's some work by Victoria Arbor and other scientists over the last few years and decades on the evolution of the tail club. And one of the things they came up with was basically if you look at what are thought to be the more primitive and earlier ankylosaurs, their tail vertebrae are not fused together at the end. They'll have osteoderms going on the outside, right? So they have armor going down the whole tail, but there's no special tail weapon at the end. And so one of the things they wanted to look at was, how do you make the tail weapon? And so what they realized is that it looks like the handle part forms first. So there do appear to be some dinosaurs that look like they have a fused tail vertebrae at the end, but no like big osteoderm weapon on the outside of it. And so they think the handle came first, and then what's called the knob, the weapon kind of part on the outside, would have come after that. And they thought they had a pretty good sequence of the evolution, where basically your first ankylosaurs are showing up in like the middle upper Jurassic deposits, and then your first kind of those modified tail vertebrae you're seeing in like, what they would interpret to be like earlier or Middle Cretaceous. And then finally, you have true tail clubs you're seeing in upper Cretaceous deposits, they're called Late Cretaceous dinosaurs. And so you've got this nice sequence of like normal tail, fused tail, actual true tail club, kind of moving up the rock record, right? So this thing, Spikelis, originally it was just a rib, right? Now they've got more material, and when they've got a few tail vertebrae that are very, very late in the tail, right? And they're fused together. They got a couple that are fused, and it looks like the same kind of thing you see with the tail clubs. It looks like the handle, which is cool, right? So they suspect, these authors that wrote the Spikelis paper, they suspect that it had a tail weapon. It had some kind of thing going on at the end of the tail.
What's the age on it?
That's the interesting part. Okay, the age of this thing. This is actually the earliest ankylosaur we have.
Wow.
So this guy is Middle Jurassic.
Oh, wow.
Not only is Spikelis Middle Jurassic, it's from Africa, where we had no ankylosaur remains ever before. So that's really cool. Like that's exciting right there. But you would expect a Middle Jurassic ankylosaur to be, primitive. Like it shouldn't have the tail weapon yet.
Right.
If we're following kind of what would have been thought of before about their evolution. And
Yeah.
so that's why Maidmon et al., that's why they're saying, hey, this is a surprise, is that this is not following the expected evolution of tail weapons in ankylosaurs.
Mm. That is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Is this now with ankylosaurs as well? Isn't there like a hypothesis they go from sort of a kind of a slimline skeletal makeup to more robust over time? Is that sort of one of the hypotheses
Yeah.
that fit into that?
Yeah, we should talk about just ankylosaurs in general and kind of there's basically traditionally been two basic types of ankylosaurs. So the one is the nodosaurid, and the other is the ankylosaurid. So ankylosaurids are the ones that have the big tail club that they swing,
Yeah.
right? Those are exclusively Upper Cretaceous. They're in the past really only known from Asia and North America, whereas your nodosaurids have a bigger range and they don't have the tail club. And yeah, they often tend to be slimmer animals, taller off the ground, slimmer skulls, whereas the ankylosaurids have really broad skulls. And the thinking there is, okay, if you have this giant tail weapon that you're going to be swinging around, right? You've got to be kind of like low to the ground. You got to be like
Like a tank.
yeah, you got to be like a tank, right? Versus your nodosaurid, you don't necessarily need to have that, right? And so the more primitive ankylosaurs, the ones that are from the Jurassic that we know about, tend to follow more closely kind of that nodosaurid body plan. There's no tail club. They tend to be narrower and taller and things. And so, yeah, if you're going to evolve that tail club, there is that expectation that the rest of your body is going to match that, right? That you're going to have this kind of more tank-like approach that you find higher in the Cretaceous. Now, unfortunately, for Spicamellis, we don't have a ton of, we don't have limb material. We don't have like a lot of that kind of stuff that will be helpful kind of distinguishing. But what we do have is telling us it's very unique, but it does appear to have a tail weapon, and it's much lower than people were thinking tail weapons would be around in ankylosaurs.
So okay, I mean that's fascinating. I mean really fascinating. The fact that it's so early in the fossil record. What's the takeaway for us as creationists?
Yeah. So, I think one thing we could be tempted to do as creationists is, say like, oh, it's like a out of order fossil, out of place fossil. Hey, you don't have to believe evolutionary narratives. They're all just fairy tales. That's not how we want to approach these kinds of problems, right? We want to realize, these are qualified scientists doing good research. And, the fact is that any thinking about historical science always involves storytelling, right? There's a narrative component, and you try and understand things, and you realize new data can often falsify ideas and make you rethink things. So I think it's important that we start, first of all, with saying, is it possible, right, that the ankylosaur group, you could have members that have tail clubs and not tail clubs? So let's imagine for a minute that there's an ankylosaur created kind, right? Where there's multiple species of ankylosaurs, multiple varieties of ankylosaurs in this one created kind. Is it possible that some of them could have tail clubs and some of them could not have tail clubs? Sure, why not, right? Like I think that's possible.
Yeah.
Is it also possible that tail clubs are something they're like a specialized thing within that created kind, right? So, maybe the original creative form didn't have them and they gained them over time, right? Like I think that's possible that God would have designed this created kind to have that trajectory and that
Given the fall,
diversification,
right? Given
right?
the fall.
Especially given the fall, right? To have a weapon, right? So yeah, given the fall, developing these tail clubs as weapons to defend themselves. Okay, so let's just suggest that, right?
Yeah.
And there is baraminology work on ankylosaurs, and it's still kind of ambiguous as to whether there's two kinds or one kind. But I think it's possible there's one kind. There's been some work kind of showing that.
Mm-hmm.
So we might fully agree with the evolutionists on the evolution of the tail club or the diversification. What do you want to call it, right? The formation of this thing. Maybe we wouldn't agree on the mechanisms, right? We might disagree on the mechanisms and the time, but
Right.
we might agree that, yeah, maybe these creatures could have this feature that appears in some members and not others.
Right.
What we would be surprised about is there to be a stratigraphic appearance of this feature, right? So what I mean is, if dinosaurs, the dinosaur fossils we have, the layers, the Triassic and Jurassic and Cretaceous, if those were formed during the flood, which is what a lot of creationists think, we'd be really surprised to be able to see like evidence of a particular kind of creature diversifying over time, right? A land creature, a big tank of an animal, okay? And so we might agree on, yeah, it very well may be that the vertebrae first fused and made the handle, and then the osteoderms formed the club around that. Like I said, we would disagree about the mechanism involved, but we would agree that that change happened.
Mhm.
What we would be surprised by, what we wouldn't expect to see, is the appearance of that feature, right? That you could track that feature appearing over time because we think that those layers are made during the flood.
Right.
And so this was a little bit of a challenge when Arbor and Curry and other people were proposing that, there was this stepwise appearance of the tail club that followed stratigraphy, okay, that followed those layers. Because that fits well with an evolutionary story that doesn't fit well with a creationist one
Right.
for flood deposits. And at the time, I remember looking at the paper, and I think we talked about this actually back in the day, that it doesn't follow it perfectly. Like it does look like you might have, some things kind of out of order, but it wasn't. It was, it still looked like a pretty strong pattern
I
overall.
think I think from memory, the data was there wasn't a huge amount of data that they were using.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and that's part of
and
it.
so there was a little bit of guessing going on there, but it looked good given
Yeah.
the data they had.
Right. And so it's cool to see an animal that's just completely bucking this trend, right? It's just like, nope, I'm going to have a tail weapon and I'm going to have it early. And, now we've since discovered too, there's a dinosaur from Chile named Steguros that has a completely unique tail weapon that's not known in other ankylosaurs. It looks like a weapon the Aztecs would use called a macahuitl, which is basically like a flat club that you have obsidian spikes on the outside of it.
Mhm.
And so you got an animal that looks like it's doing that. It's not building the tail club the same way. Doesn't have the fused tail vertebrae. That one's from the Cretaceous though, so that's just seen as a weird offshoot doing its own thing. And here you're seeing an animal that's one of the first ankylosaurs, if not the first ankylosaur in the fossil record, and it's super specialized with a tail weapon doing something really weird, right? And so that's not what you'd predict as an evolutionist. You'd think, oh, the first ankylosaurs are really generalized, and over time they're going to get these specializations. Over time, you're going to build a tail weapon. So it's kind of cool to see something that doesn't match the predictions, causing them to kind of rethink how do we tell the story, and that's more in line with what we might expect to see during a global flood.
Yeah, and I think what's like what you said there, some really interesting things is that we might think that ankylosaurs there was lots of diversity going on. I mean,
Mm,
some people might call that evolution. They might, like you said, disagree. We might disagree on the mechanisms. So we would say there's some kind of mediated design which could
mhm.
use natural selection, other kinds of Darwinian or neo-Darwinian mechanisms, but also they could be mechanisms that we're not familiar with that are not operating today. So that sort of agrees with a lot of what evolutionists would say. And so as creationists, we don't want to throw everything out. We want to
Right.
say, hey, there's some things here that are actually interesting and could be factual, but what about this? Like
Yeah.
you said, it's really the order in the fossil record that, from a creationist perspective, is going to cast some questions on it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think so we think about what kind of what are the takeaways for a creationist listening to this video, thinking about this paper. We already said, okay, first of all, glory of God is on display, really cool, exciting discovery. We never want to turn new discoveries just into arguments, for bait for evolutionists or creationists. That's not the point. God's glorified, right? But number two, we do have an interesting thing going on here where what seemed like a really clear story laid out before evolutionarily is now kind of a little bit jeopardized, and it's not as clear and it's getting murky. And that's kind of cool because that's what we might expect for flood deposits, like we talked about. But I think there's a third thing here that I think it's good and challenging for creationists to think about. And you got this crazy spiny pincushion of an animal, right? And you think, okay, what is going on here? And the first thought, of course, is defense, right? Like this animal is protecting itself.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense in a post-fall reality. But if Ankylosauria, or maybe Ankylosauridae, or whatever, is a created kind, what would a pre-fall Ankylosaur be like, right? Why have all these spines and bony things? Because you might be tempted to think, oh, they just didn't have them beforehand, because they didn't need to defend themselves if there were no predators. But that's where I think it's important that we think creatively as creationists. And not only that, but we really recognize that animals often have more than one reason for the features that they have, right? So an elephant, does use its tusks sometimes for fighting. Elephants do use their tusks to also help them, in pushing things or in kind of, digging things. But they will also use them for show, right? An elephant with bigger tusks is more impressive to a potential mate and can also scare away other animals and things like that. So the same feature can be used in lots of ways. And that's something they talk about in this paper, and of course gets discussed in the literature about a lot, is that these are also display features, right? It's really impressive to see a giant pincushion walking around. Like that's a very fascinating thing. We like looking at cacti and hedgehogs and porcupines and stuff. Like they're funny to us. They look interesting and they're an interesting design. But so it's not just defense; it might also be display. But there's other stuff going on here too. So there's a really cool some work that's been done on other animals with osteoderms. So these bony armor pieces, crocodilians and ground sloths and other creatures like that that had some bony things in their skin. And it turns out these can have other benefits to the creatures. For instance, they think some osteoderms in some animals were actually serving as kind of like nutrient supplements, like they could store calcium in there. Some of them might be related to giving off or taking heat or different things like that. There's really, we're just beginning to study it. And it's because we assume from the beginning, oh, it has to be defense. It's the only thing these can be. We missed out sometimes on some of the other stuff going on.
Yeah.
So when we think about a pre-fall creature versus a post-fall creature, and we say, hey, there's this weird feature, what do we do with this? Well, maybe the dominant thing that this is being used for in the post-fall world is defense, right? It's protection. It's to scare away predators. It's to fight with other things. But that doesn't demand that that was the original use of that, right? That God in his wisdom could have created this creature that it was originally that those osteoderms were used for something else, display and nutrient supply and other stuff like that, that then could be also used for defense after the fall,
Right.
right? And so, a good example of this, if you watch a nature documentary, right, and they have like cheetahs and they got the baby cheetahs and the baby cheetahs are play fighting with each other, right? The narrator always says, why are the baby cheetahs playing with each other? What's the purpose of that?
My guess is they're practicing how to eventually fight and kill things.
Right? That's always how it's told. And that's true. Like, I think that makes sense, right? That's what's going on. So, rewind, think about pre-fall world, do baby cheetahs or whatever their ancestors, baby cats or whatever, do they need to practice hunting one day? No. There's no hunting in the pre-fall world. Well, then what do we make of that? Well, maybe we've got it flipped on its head, right? In the current world, this animal must hunt to survive, right? And so this play behavior gets ramped up to be predatory behavior when it becomes an adult. But what if in the pre-fall world, actually the dominant thing was play? Like that was what that feature was for, and it's only in the fall that the hormones or whatever get ramped up there to switch that play behavior to actual predatory behavior, to antagonistic behavior you might think of. And so something that is harmless and useful for a different purpose could actually be co-opted, whatever you want to call it, right? Exapted, although it's actually by design, so it's not by accident, but for this other purpose after the fall.
Yeah.
And I think that that's like those are the kinds of things we want to be thinking about as creationists. That something that seems like a challenge, there might actually be a different way of thinking about it. That's really cool and exciting.
Yeah, that's fascinating because that's a whole area of study, right? That's why we need
Yeah.
creationists. We just don't have enough people to study all of these different facets and
Right.
possibilities. And there are other hypotheses that can come out of that too. Like maybe that play behavior, pre-fall play behavior, maybe that was used to diversify pre-fall animals. We didn't need, the survival of the fittest, and we didn't need
Yeah.
natural selection to to cause adaptations and to cause diversification. Maybe God had diversification mechanisms pre-fall that used benevolent actions, right, in order to cause diversity in animals.
Right.
So, I don't think we would, I don't know about you, I haven't thought about it really, but were pre-fall animals static? I don't think so. I think they probably
No.
changed too, like they do in the
Yeah.
modern
I think they
world,
probably made a change.
but probably use more benevolent mechanisms than malevolent ones like today. So anyway, there's a whole.
Right.
These are just some ideas that we're coming up with, but there are a whole bunch of hypotheses that creationists get hold of with that. So
Right. No, and absolutely. And the truth is like our current world, we only know a world that's run by death, right?
right,
That's the only world we understand. The economy is death, right? You've got the predators eat the lower things on the food chain, and then what's left over gets decomposed, and in the cycle, the whole circle of life, Lion King kind of deal, right? And that's what we're used to. And it's hard for us to imagine what an economy would be like if it didn't run on death, And I've seen some critics of creationism use that and say, well, there you go. Like we
right,
can't. It's impossible. How could you have a world without this?
yeah,
And that's where I respond, well, yeah, I mean, if you're a Christian, you believe there one day will be a world without this.
exactly,
And not only that, there'll be a world without sin. I can't imagine a world without sin.
right,
I also can't imagine a world without like growth and maturity, like in the sense of like, babies are born and babies grow into kids and kids grow into adults and adults get older. Like, we constantly think in those concepts, right? Of like, okay, how long am I working till I retire? And what am I going to do? And what are my kids going to be doing? And how do I prepare for their college? The world we're going into as eternal beings
yeah,
will have none of that,
right,
right? And we don't know. We can't even conceive of that possibility.
right.
So we need to be really careful that we're not limiting ourselves just based on the fact that we only know certain stuff. We only know a particular world.
Yeah, we don't want our experience to dictate reality, because experience is powerful, but obviously, it could be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like, I always think of Steve Austin, saying, think about the past, things were different then, right? And we have to be really careful that we don't play the uniformitarian game of it was just, well, this is how it works right now. This is must be how it always has worked and always will work. And, that's not necessarily true. And it's
Right.
definitely not true in many cases.
Right, exactly. All right, well, good. I think that pretty much sums that up. Is that right, Matt?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know how many of you viewers were expecting to jump from an Ankylosaur to talking about eternity, but that's the kind of wonderful things that happen here, right?
I know, like playing cheetahs and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
We really covered the gamut today. So, all right. Well, Dr. Matt McLain, again, thank you for coming on. I'm sure we'll have something interesting. I mean, every time we chat, I really enjoy our chats. It's got something interesting and provoking, thought-provoking that we can talk about for creationism. So thanks for coming on, Matt. Appreciate that.
Yep.
All right, so that's all from me. Ken Colson here at Creation Unfolding. Don't forget to hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe. Of course, there is a link in the description if you'd like to give. Always appreciate that. Pray for Creation Unfolding Ministries. Always appreciate that. Just spend a few seconds. That would be great. And we'll see you next time. Thank you and goodbye.